While you waste your energy, they will treat you like shot tea. Stoicism. There's a kind of tiredness the body can't explain. It's not a heaviness in the muscles or a pain in the bones. It's an exhaustion that comes from within, as if the soul has walked miles in silence. Maybe you remember a day like that day you laid your head on the pillow feeling drained, not from physical work, but from giving your last breath to people or situations that, in the end, gave nothing back. It's a cold emptiness, as if the flame you were carrying was used to light bonfires that weren't yours. Seneca wrote that life is short, not because we have little time, but because we waste it. And wasting it isn't just spending hours on Eustract. It's also giving energy to those who don't know how, don't want to, or can't value it. It's investing warmth in fireplaces with open window, where the wind comes in without asking and steals the heat before it can warm anything. With every gesture, every attempt to fix what isn't yours, you add more wood, but the cold remains because the window is not under your control. Epictetus said, "Take care of what is under your control and let the rest take its course." This is not just a philosophical lesson, but a practical reminder for emotional survival. Spending energy on what doesn't depend on you is like trying to hold back the tide with your hand. The effort is immense, but the result is always the same. The water escapes, and you find yourself exhausted, soaked, and without the strength to return to the shore. The truth is that respect and value begin at the exact point where you decide to stop wasting yourself. It's a silent but powerful boundary. It's the moment you realize you are not here to be eternal fuel for other people's engines, that life doesn't demand you be the constant provider of warmth, but the guardian of your own flame. And it's precisely when you learn to protect it that it begins to illuminate those who genuinely want to be by your side. The silent mistake of believing more effort brings more value. There's an ingrained belief that seems noble, but in practice erodes you from the inside. The idea that if we do more, we will be more valued. This logic, which often comes from a genuine desire to contribute, slowly turns into an invisible prison. You start by taking an extra step, then 2, then 10. At first, you feel useful, important, necessary, but without realizing it, the weight of the relationship or situation begins to rest entirely on your shoulders, and you start living as if you were the only pillar supporting something that should be mutual. The cost of this is high. Holding up a bond, a project, or even a family environment by yourself is like trying to hold up an entire bridge with just your hand. There is constant tension, a fear that everything will collapse if you loosen your grip. But worse than that, there is an exhaustion that gives no warning sign until you are already at your limit. It's the kind of fatigue that isn't solved by rest, because it doesn't just come from physical effort, but from deep emotional strain. Seneca warned that dedicating yourself to what is not shared is like sowing in barren soil. No matter how much you work, nothing truly flourishes. And so you become everyone's emotional shock absorber, the one who always listens, always fixes, always endures, but who, the moment they need support, finds that an echo is the only response. It's a paradoxical loneliness, surrounded by people who depend on you, yet incapable of offering the same when the balance shifts. The problem isn't helping. The problem is when helping becomes your only identity. When you start believing you can only stay in a place if you are constantly proving your value. This logic doesn't create respect, it creates dependency. And dependency is a fragile bond that breaks the moment you stop meeting expectations. The truth is that more effort doesn't always mean more value. Often, it just means more wear and tear. Strength isn't in holding everything up by yourself, but in recognizing when something is only standing because you are spending more of yourself than you should. Because as much as it seems like an act of love, there is a point where continuing to hold on isn't a sign of strength, it's your own silent surrender. When your energy becomes disposable, there's a point where silent generosity turns into invisibility. When your presence is always available, your help is immediate, and your care is constant, the other person starts to get used to it. And what is constant, without limits, runs the risk of being seen as something guaranteed. Not out of malice, but because human beings have a tendency to normalize what they receive effortlessly. This is how your energy, which should be a gift, becomes background noise, something that's just there but is no longer noticed. Seneca recalled that What is too free becomes invisible. It's a harsh but real warning. When everything you offer is given without measure, it risks not being valued. The other person stops perceiving the cost of what they receive because they never had to consider what it would be like to live without your time, your attention, your care. It all becomes part of a daily landscape that no one bothers to contemplate anymore. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, almost imperceptible process that sets in when you normalize the act of giving yourself beyond what's necessary. Gradually, what was once recognized as a generous gesture starts to be expected as an obligation. And when that happens, no gratitude can survive, because gratitude is born from the recognition of rarity, not from boundless repetition. The greatest risk is that you start to believe you need to continue this cycle to be accepted. But in truth, the more you fade to sustain the brightness of others, the more they get used to your shadow. And so, without realizing it, you become disposable, not because you have no value, but because you let your value be confused with infinite availability. The energy you offer is part of who you are. It's not inexhaustible. It doesn't renew itself in a vacuum. And if you allow it to be spent without discretion, one day you'll realize you're trying to be a source for everyone while your own reservoir is running dry, because no one can water the whole world and still expect to blossom from within. The false strength of enduring everything. There's a silent narrative we've been taught since childhood that enduring more than others is a sign of strength, that bearing things without complaining is a virtue, that being always firm even when you're breaking inside is proof of your worth. But this belief, repeated like a mantra, can turn into a trap disguised as courage, because deep down, enduring everything isn't always strength. Sometimes it's just the fear of letting go. When you get used to absorbing weight that isn't yours, you start to believe the world can't function without your constant effort. The problem is that this infinite resilience doesn't inspire respect. It inspires exploitation. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that true strength lies in choosing where to spend yourself, not in letting yourself be consumed by everything. And choosing requires courage, the courage to say no when everyone expects you to say yes. There's a myth that setting boundaries pushes people away. But in practice, the opposite is true. Boundaries filter. They push away those who fed on your exhaustion and bring closer those who respect your presence. It's a natural movement, like the tide that recedes to reveal what truly remains on the sand. Blind resilience may seem heroic, but it comes at a high price. Every time you endure more than you should, you pay with pieces of yourself. And one day, without realizing it, you'll find there's nothing left to offer, not for lack of willingness, but because you wore yourself out trying to hold up something that was never your duty to sustain alone. Strength isn't in holding everything up by yourself. Strength is in knowing that you don't have to endure everything to be worthy of being here. Saying enough isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you've understood that your energy isn't infinite, and that the respect you deserve begins the moment you decide not to sacrifice yourself to keep alive what by its nature no longer wants to live. The Stoic practice to regain your center. Regaining your own center isn't a grand act. It's a silent exercise, repeated day after day. It's like aligning a ship's sail in a storm. A single correction isn't enough. Constancy is needed. Stoicism reminds us that this stability comes from the habit of looking inward before looking outward. At the end of each day, ask yourself sincerely, where did I spend my energy that didn't need to be spent? This simple observation is like lighting a lantern inside yourself, revealing the points where your strength is escaping. Creating an emotional budget is another vital step. Just as we don't hand over all our money to anyone who asks, we also can't give attention and energy to everything that calls to us. This isn't coldness, it's dignified survival. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul is dyed by the thoughts it harbors. If your mind is constantly occupied with unnecessary wear and tear, your life will follow the same pattern. When you choose with clarity where to invest your energy, you create fertile ground for life to flourish in the right place. This practice requires discernment and discipline. It's a training that's almost invisible to others, but it profoundly transforms the way you position yourself in the world. At first, it might feel selfish to say no, or to distance yourself from draining situations. But with time, you realize that conserving energy isn't an act of denial. It's an act of protection. It's like saving water during a drought, not to deny it to others, but to ensure that what's left can sustain life. When you take back control over where and how you spend your energy, something changes in your gaze. A calmer, more centered, less reactive presence emerges, and it is this serenity that, paradoxically, makes your value more clearly felt. Because there is no possible respect when you yourself treat your energy as something disposable, and there is no more silent strength than the one that chooses where to remain whole. Respect is built with the energy you keep for yourself. Respect isn't earned just by what you give, but also by what you preserve. There's an invisible line between healthy giving and weight, and it's on this line that true value begins to be born. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we lose a lot of." And losing it doesn't just mean wasting hours, but also letting your own strength dissolve into causes that don't nourish you. Cicero argued that living well is living according to reason and measure. This measure is the balance between contributing and protecting yourself, between opening your heart and maintaining your integrity. A river that irrigates all fields without discretion will sooner or later be reduced to a dry bed. But a river that chooses where to flow stays alive and capable of sustaining life for much longer. Its strength lies in continuing to run only where the water is welcome. Keeping energy for yourself isn't about closing off. It's about preparing to be fully present where it truly matters. It's understanding that you can't nourish everything and everyone without first nourishing yourself. When this clarity sets in, your perspective changes. You stop chasing recognition and start offering your presence as something rare and, therefore, precious. Only when you stop wasting yourself do others perceive your true value. And it's not because you did something to be noticed, but because the absence of excess reveals the essential. It is in this silence, in this space between what you give and what you keep, that respect begins to grow. Because no one respects what seems inexhaustible, but everyone perceives the value of what is given with consciousness, measure, and purpose. Life doesn't ask us to be an inexhaustible source for everyone, but to be conscious guardians of the energy we carry. Seneca reminded us that time and strength are riches that, once spent without discretion, do not return. True respect isn't bought with blind effort, but earned with the wisdom of knowing when to act and when to withdraw. Cicero said that living well is living according to reason and measure, and perhaps this measure is understanding that you shouldn't run in every direction, trying to warm fireplaces that aren't yours. It's like a river that carefully chooses the fields it will irrigate, preserving its course to continue flowing. It's not selfishness to keep your own water. It's the only way to continue existing as a river. There's a deep serenity in living this way. You stop trying to prove yourself all the time, stop offering more than you can sustain, stop losing yourself in causes that give nothing back. And in this space, something more important than the approval of others begins to flourish. The peace of knowing you remain whole. In the end, respect and value are not asked for. They reveal themselves when you live in a way that your boundaries are non-negotiable and your presence is a choice, not an obligation. Because only when you stop wasting yourself do others learn to see you not as a source that will always be there, but as a place of truth, strength, and presence that deserves to be cared for.